Okay, we're live. Hello, I'm Mitch. Welcome back to Monday Mind Shifting with Mitch. I set up 2 weeks ago to conduct a series on what I viewed as the most reference based, effective way to solve problems, make decisions, and be successful. Um, and this is a method borrowed from an air fighter pilot. And then last week, I did the first session. But before I go into that, I just want to show everybody what it looks like here. Let me just share the screen for a minute. And here we are today. I'm just outside of New York. And uh, for those in the US, we got about 21 inches of snow. I think that's about 53, 54 centimeters. And here actually is my wife doing the shoveling at that point. We kind of took turns at it. So we're kind of snowbound. It just stopped snowing about 15 minutes ago. So I think I'll probably go out right after this and do another round of shoveling. But let me stop sharing for a minute. Uh, so what I'd planned to do in the session originally is after last session where we talked about decision making and problem solving. Um, I intended to kind of dive into what's the most critical point in decision making based on the model that we introduced last time. But let me ask you something. How many of you lay out a plan and then start executing it. And when the results start coming in, they're not exactly what you expect, or perhaps even what you wanted. When that happens, what do you tend to do? And I'm going to get the chat up so I can see who. Let me theme music help chat. Here's chat. So I can see if people are responding. Um, and I'll just say that for most people, okay, most of the time when we start doing something and it doesn't starts out not working, our survival brains kick in, okay, and we may deny the results, or we may look for someone or something to blame, or often we give up. Sometimes we play the victim or we blame ourselves. um, as I'm saying these things, I'm thinking, wow, something that just sounds like so many of the politicians that we have to deal with today, right? Uh, so last week, when I started this series, I described the process of making decisions. This is a decision-making process that's been proved for over 50 years. It's the most successful method devised for achieving results. I think I gave a good session. In fact, the immediate feedback from the people that were watching was, "Wow, this is really good content. This was a really good session." Uh, how many of you remember what that method was? Well, the name of the method is called OODA loops, and the session this week was going to be on the second and the most important step of OODA loops. It's the orient step. But then during the week, I had a chance to interact with a few people who had watched the session. And do you know that one of the people that I interacted with remembered that we talked about OODA loops, what the name was, or knew what the orient step was? So that was disappointing to me. And using mind shifting, which is the methodology that I'm recommending, I decided to use that information as feedback on what I should do next. And I decided that I would just decide to say that all those people who didn't understand it, that they were just idiots. That it's not really my fault. Oh, sorry. I mean, I would just say that I failed. That I was trying to introduce a concept, and I'm just not a very good speaker, and I should just give up. No, 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 that's not mind shifting either. So in mind shifting, what you do is you kind of reset your brain and you kind of look at the information, um, and you figure out what you're going to do next in order to succeed. So today, we're not going to worry about the acronyms. We're gonna we're just going to focus on the key to problem solving and making good decisions, how we make sense of a situation, and how we come up with possible solutions. I'm not going to tell you the name of the step that we're going to cover is orient. Okay. I'm not going to tell you that John Boyd said that the orient step was the most important step in being successful. I'm not going to tell you that orient or that there's four steps in the OODA process: observe, orient, decide, and act. And in fact, I'm not going to mention OODA at all. But before we dive into that, I do want to mention um, that all the concepts that we're going over in this series on decision making, they're just a small piece of our upcoming course, Mind Shifting Resilient Mindsets for Long-Term Success. And this course starts April 14th. So if you want to learn how to keep your survival brain from taking over so you can be more successful, I have the QR code up here on the screen. You can scan that to learn more. And I will say that the current course, which is on the resourceful brain that starts tomorrow, that course filled up about 3 weeks ago, and there's like a 30-person waiting list. So if you're interested, you should probably sign up relatively quickly. So one of the issues that we face when we're making decisions is that life is rarely crystal clear. We often face information that's ambiguous. For example, sometimes my wife will ask me a question like, "Do you want salmon for dinner tonight?" Now, originally I thought that was just a simple question, right? Yes, I want salmon, or no, I don't want salmon. But now what I've learned is I don't really know what she's asking, and I have to find out more. Like, is she really just asking me what my preference is? And she might. Is she asking me to make a decision? Or is she just politely announcing that we are having salmon? You know, I really don't know. And I have to find out before I answer the question. Because the world is confusing, our brains love to grab onto the very first solution that comes to mind. Now, studies show that only 15% of important decisions involve looking at more than two alternatives. Our brain comes up with something, we latch onto it, we decide that that's going to work, and we stop thinking. But data also show that when three or more alternatives are considered, solutions are 60% more likely to be successful. So just look at that. Only, 85% of decisions only involve one choice. And yet, when we do involve more than one alternative, solutions are 60% more successful. So our goal should probably be to always have at least three options when we're making an important decision. And if we think of these options as hypotheses, kind of like the scientific method, right? You're making a best guess in each of those situations. If I take this actions, I predict that this result will happen. The question is like, how do you come up with these three options? Well, when we observe a situation, we don't generally see raw objective reality. John Boyd, that same guy that I said I wasn't going to mention to you, John Boyd, who came up with the OODA loop, which also I said I wasn't going to mention to you, pointed out that we filter reality through our genetic heritage, our cultural traditions, and our previous experiences. So if we aren't careful, what we already know or what we already believe blinds us, and we just repeat old habits. And those are known as, cognitive biases. And we all are familiar with confirmation bias, where we only seek information that already agrees with what we know. But there's like 20 other types of biases. Um, John Boyd called these incestuous loops. And incestuous in the sense that we see information, we know what we want to observe, and so we observe uh, only the information that supports what we already know, and then we take another action based on that, and we Again, only observe what we already know. And so we come to conclusions based on, what we already thought the results were going to be, and then we don't progress. So, if we aren't careful, that's what we do to get past our biases and to come up with fresh options. What we have to use is a combination of analysis and synthesis. Now, analysis is breaking things down. We look at what we already know, we look at the data, and we categorize it. But analysis alone isn't enough for new problems. We also need synthesis. Synthesis is creating something brand new by drawing on different domains or by looking at competing channels of information to deal with unfamiliar situations. You analyze the situation, you synthesize or come up with a few new ideas, and then you predict that will happen. That's how you generate your three hypotheses. Now, as we're looking at information, it's easiest to come up with things based on analysis. And that's another trap that we get into. We analyze and analyze and analyze. But when we're only doing analysis, yes, we're only using proven solutions, but we're also only using solutions that are basically doing what we've always done. And it's that synthesis step, which is taking risks, but it's really the only way to come up with new things that we have to force ourselves to do. So in the next steps, once you have your options, you then decide which of them you're going to try to do, and then you act. But here's the secret of good problem solving: you don't act with the expectation of immediate perfect success. You act with the purpose of observing the results, looking at information, and then deciding what you're going to do next. So I've had to learn this the hard way over and over again. One time, I guess it was about 20 years ago, I was asked to build all the courses to start an online high school. I had to find people to write the courses. I had to put the courses into a learning management system. I had to proof the courses. But this became a problem with calculus because I had to proof the calculus problems. And I hadn't taken calculus, since I was in high school. So I was completely stuck. But my daughter, Rosie, was taking calculus at the time. So come up with the first problem. I can't figure out how to solve it. I bring it to her. She spends about 2 minutes on it. She solves it. She explains to me what she did. I go back. I do the next problem. The next problem I couldn't do. I go back to her. And my hypothesis was, or I was sure, I'd have this problem. I'd bring it to her and she'd solve it. But instead, she looked at me and she said, "Dad, I have a lot of faith in you. I know with hard work, you're going to figure it out. So I'm going to let you learn and grow on your own. You go back and you work on this." She literally used all the growth mindset stuff I had been using with her since she was born. And to be honest, like, I don't think that's fair. I mean, shouldn't your kids just do what you tell them? I mean, yeah, we want them to be independent and everything, but not with us, right? So in this case, anyhow, I didn't have the luxury of fighting or freezing or blaming. And anyone who's ever been around a teenager knows you can't just tell them what to do and expect it to be done. So I needed to be able to access my resourcefulness and get those problems proofed, which I eventually did through a combination of learning to solve some of them myself and finding a math teacher who could do the quality assurance so that I didn't have to do all of it. So my first action didn't get the results I wanted. So after I observed her reaction, I needed to accept the feedback and consider what to do next. considering that what to do next is that step where you try to analyze and synthesize, analyze what happened and synthesize to come up with new things. So I had to loop back, reanalyze the situation, and synthesize a new way to prove these calculus problems. So rarely can we make a decision, implement, and then just walk away. The ability to observe and adjust probably even more critical than coming up with the first plan of action, which is why OODA loops have been so successful as a strategy for over 50 years, because it's bringing you back through that decision making process. Oh, wait a minute. Sorry. Didn't I say before that I wouldn't mention OODA loops? Well, uh, I guess don't trust me. I guess I lie. But anyhow, this process of being able to look at information and know, oh, wait a minute, I'm going to do this. Information is going to come back. It's very likely not going to work. So I'm going to take that information and then I'm going to analyze it, come up with some other things, decide what to do, act again. That's probably not going to work, but it's going to give me information as well. That having that process in mind, that's what makes us resilient. And when we come up with alternatives, we decide, we do it, we observe the results, and then we figure out our next move. So, kind of as we wrap up today, I want to go back to why I started this series on problem solving and decision making in the first place. Okay, my hope for this series is that you don't just hear interesting theories, but that you walk away with concepts and techniques that you can immediately apply to your lives, your classrooms, and your workplaces. After today's session, maybe you've picked up things like using the orient step to catch yourself before you jump to your first idea, and then spend some time looking at your base results, force yourself to come up with, synthesize and come up with three different alternatives, and then treat your actions as experiments to get feedback that you can then use as you observe them to come up with what to do next. And now, for myself, I also need to practice what I preach. At the beginning of the session, I told you I observed that the acronyms weren't working last week. So I pivoted today to focus mostly on the practical steps, and not to mention that it's the OODA loop, that John Boyd invented it, and that the second step in the OODA loop is orient, because it's observe, orient, decide, and act. So I've, for the most part, skipped the acronyms and the names. My next job is to find ways to observe the results of this week's session. So talking to people who've seen the session, did my attempt to leave out the jargon or simplify the jargon help? Will you be able to make better decisions after listening to this session? Will you want to come back to other sessions? So over the next few days, I'll be looking at the chat, talking to a few of you who have been watching this, using that feedback to decide exactly where we go for the next Mondays. Now, next week, my guest will be Josh Chernikov. When Josh and I get together, we always seem to cover some interesting ground, some unexpected places where mind shifting has cropped up, maybe in our own professional lives or our personal lives, or maybe even reactions to politics, because I understand the State of the Union address is coming up. There is the Supreme Court action about tariffs. A lot's happening. So we'll be talking about how do we apply those things to mind shifting so that we do better at our jobs, we do better as part of society, and we interact with our family better. So you're probably not going to want to miss that. That's going to be next Monday. And if you want to equip yourself and the people around you with these skills in a much deeper way, please consider taking that Mind Shifting Resilient Mindsets for Long-Term Success course. The next cohort's going to start April 14th, and you can see the QR code on the screen above you. So I'm going to sign off. This is Mitch for at Mind Shifting Mondays with Mitch. Keep mind shifting, and I'll see you next Monday.